for the Sweetwater County Board of County Commissioners this Monday, October 25th, 2021. We do have commissioners present in the chamber, as well as we will have commissioners possibly joining us as we move on. So with that, before we get started, please stand and join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Our agenda for our workshop today is two items. One, to have a budget update that will be presented by our assessor, I believe, who may be part of it, although it'll be mainly presented by our accountant, Miss Bonnie Berry. And if Dave Davis he's in the chamber, so he'll assist if he wishes. But I presume between the two of them, we'll have an update. And then following that, we will move into goal setting. And Commissioner Lloyd will lead that part of our strategic planning. I do want people in the chamber to know, and if there's anybody out there, that we designated an hour and a half for this workshop, and we will maintain that. So we will plan to shut down right shortly after 5:30, allowing for the couple minutes we started late as well. So with that, Ms. Berry, are you ready to present any numbers to us?
I was not asked to present anything today, so I did not come prepared. I came prepared because I thought this was a discussion amongst the commissioners. And so I came prepared to listen so that I know what's going on and can help you in the future. So I did not prepare anything.
That's fine.
I have not received any updates since I presented at the last meeting. So everything's the same from then, but if you would like me to
we're fine.
Get anything or present anything, I'd be happy to.
We'll move right into what was planned as commissioners to have a conversation regarding the budget.
I apologize. That was my understanding, and that's all that was communicated at the last meeting.
Which is part of the strategic plan and that type of thing. So I believe one of those conversations was, and I don't know, there's just three of us here.
Well,
to give direction to the budget.
but we
Commissioner Lloyd, go ahead.
Yeah, I sit here struggling with that too, but also think if we keep putting off the discussion based upon numbers, we may never have the discussion. And so
Let's start it out.
I think the three of us would be a great start, and we can start having discussion. And remember that I think this is the concept of it is goal setting. It is just discussion and having a raucous conversation about about what we think. What are the important parts? Where do we need to look at our financials? I do think that I have to be honest and say when we had our budget presented to us last Tuesday, I think I was really surprised with the numbers we were given, actually, and in a pleasant way. And I know that does change the outlook, but there are still priorities and discussions that need to be had. I think specifically to what are our priorities? Do we, there was discussion last time of, do we need to start looking at, employee raises? It's been a point. Do we, we have the health insurance discussion that will be up next week on the budget, how that's going to affect us, because that could be a 17, wasn't a $1.7 million approximately shift. We talked about how the county has some of our county employees and some of our county departments have shouldered a lot of the cuts, and how do we move forward? So I think this is a great place for the three of us, and if anyone joins on Zoom,
I'll watch.
to start having a discussion about what do we think our priorities are.
Let me back up for a second on the health insurance. If I remember correctly, it was a 17% increase, which you would equate to about a 1.3 million, Commissioner, is what I believe he shared with us. So just to get that piece of the items straight. So you're exactly right. So I agree with you. Let's get started and set some priorities, and our other commissioners, if they happen to show up or come aboard, they can do that. So I guess maybe how would you like to do that?
Maybe we just open the floor and say to, where do we see some of the, where do each of us see some of the priorities, some of the directions we need to go, some of the actions we might want to consider over the next year as we work toward this budget. And I think it could be big picture. It could be, we could talk about salaries within employees. We could talk about, do we need to evaluate departments and determine what numbers should be in each department? Are we staffed right in each department to meet services? What are those priorities? And so, and I know from off conversations with both of you guys and just knowing both of you, I know that these are things you think about. So I think this is a great spot just to start putting our own minds that we've thought about to ourselves, or maybe amongst each other on occasion. What do we think we need to be focusing on, and what are the big things we have to address in this upcoming budget? So,
Commissioner Smith, do you have anything to add to that?
like a bad karaoke bar.
I know.
Test.
You're good.
Yeah, actually, the three goals that I mentioned last meeting, which Roy's touched on, all I think are, well, raises and salaries overall, which I guess perhaps are two different things. Staffing levels, where are we at? Where, who needs help? Who maybe can drop some, and then reduction of services that we're providing. We've talked about that a little bit too. Are we overstepping our bounds in some areas and providing funding for perhaps services that we don't need to, or shouldn't be doing, or duplicated, that kind of thing. So those are the three things that I think are our priorities from the get-go.
Okay, so what'd you just say about services?
Reducing services,
but
question mark.
No, but you said the last word. What was that? Repeating services or
Duplication.
duplication. Thank you. Quickly, words get away.
Yeah, so those are the things that I think that certainly right out of the gate we need to look at, and then and when we talk salaries, raises, I think that also will include, or needs to include, and we're not going to have much time to think about this coming cycle for insurance, but overall benefits. As you talked about the benefits, yeah, it's a pretty sweet deal, but our salaries also often kind of offset the benefits, and so you have to look at the whole package. And are we competitive? A lot of people work here because of the benefits and not because of the pay. Some people work here because of the pay, but I think we need to look at that and make sure that we're not, oh, gee, we're so rich in our benefits area, let's trim that down, and then we end up losing people or having to pay more in salaries. So
yeah, and I put down salary / benefits, and I think part of that piece of it is as we look at that, we also got to look at we know costs are going up to the county and everything, and the health benefits were an example. In other words, does the county continue to shoulder that share, or do we begin do we continue to look at how we can partner that with our employees as we have in the past? Because we do some partnering with benefit costs. So I think salaries and benefits and just share cost sharing of that, especially with in benefits and that, and that type of thing. Anything else to add, Commissioner Lloyd?
No, I think those were the three areas we really did identify at the last meeting. And I think those are good, discussions of where to start. And I think, and that could eventually lead down to, I think, the discussion of how, we've had some conversation about maybe a grant program, for the outside entities, and maybe with the current financials, we don't need to, but maybe rather than, talking to Christina about it, and just throwing this out there out loud as this discussion ensues, is maybe rather than a grant program, maybe we need to have a serious discussion about what questions do we need to have from the outside entities to make those decisions of who's serving the, where we have to put our money into, what are the best is to put our money into the pot if we do have to look at any reductions to the outside agencies. So maybe it doesn't have to be a grant process, but maybe making sure we have all the questions when we get asked. I'll give you an example. Last time we took a hard look at who had days of cash on hand. One of the organizations that got hit really hard with that was Golden Hour Senior Center. Now, Young at Heart didn't have as much cash on hand, but one of the differences between the two organizations, though, is Golden Hour, all their fundraising goes into their general fund because they don't have a foundation. Whereas like Young at Heart has a foundation and a lot of their fundraising money goes in there. So in a way, we get, if you look at it from an interesting perspective, even though Young at Heart looks like in their budget they have less money than Golden Hour, they actually have more because it's in a foundation. But that money that Golden Hour is getting is going into a different direction. So one of the questions we may ask is, do you have a foundation? How much money is in your foundation?
We really need to be better informed about what it is we're doing. And as we look at each of those budgets, which will take a little more time, one of the things that I wrote down as you were talking is I think one of our goals has to be how to fund outside agencies and component units. And you mentioned a grant as one of them. And I think that's probably taken the lead from what conversations I've heard, but I think we need to just write it down so we don't forget about it.
Yeah. And I think, and with that, and as I've really pondered the grant thing, the grant concept, could we simplify it and not get into the whole grant world just by making sure, what did we, I think when we were talking about the grant, the goal was to accomplish was to get information from outside entities and component units so we could start making calls of who's impacting the biggest populations, who's impacting people in general at the greatest way. So as we're having to make decisions, we're doing it in a more objective way rather than in a subjective way. We might be able to get that same information just by changing the questions we ask and moving forward, not in a grant concept, but with those same kind of concepts in mind. What information do we need to know to make those bigger decisions?
Do you feel we're well on our way moving in that direction from what you've heard from our previous commission meetings?
I think so. I think we just have to decide as a group, what information do we need from component agencies and the component agencies and the outside entities to make our decisions. And I think we started last year by having us go do one-on-one conversations. And I think that was a great start because it allowed us all to maybe get a little more in depth, a little bit better idea of what was going on and to be able to share that. But I think we can capture that same information without going out to agencies one-on-one by just asking the right questions beforehand.
Yeah. And did you want to say? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think though part of that is, at least that was my vision for the grant kind of concept. Maybe it's not a grant, but it's more of a ranking system, just so that we're ranking, whether it's numbers or, weighting things. And it seems like the grant world is kind of that.
Yeah.
And so maybe not getting into all of the grant world, but finding something where we get some information, we can assign a value to it and say, days cash on hand, you have this much, so that's worth, this many, and we come out with some kind of a score or a number, and we can kind of rank things of well, this place is really in need. This one touches a lot of people. And we can sort of see that without having to go into long, explanations. And some directors are eloquent and can explain very well to us why they do what they do, and others maybe don't present as well, but run a great, entity. And so they, we end up kind of giving the money here or there based on their presentation or their word. So yeah, something that's a little more easy for us to look at and just take a look at numbers or whatever it is, a weighted system.
Yeah, and it makes sense to me, Jeff, because in a way, when you start to look at the outside entities, someone may see a bigger value in one organization than the other, and someone may see another as a value. really they all do a good job in their own way and they all are effective. And it really becomes more sometimes an emotional tie or just a history or maybe a greater innate knowledge about something that would lead you. So when we started talking the grant process, and maybe the way to move away from the grant concept, but a scoring system, a tiered system that kind of gives us an idea to be more objective rather than going on subjective and feelings.
Mhm.
I always hear the great story that Wally would tell us about the time they were going to cut 4-H, and about 40 to 50 4-Hers and sheep and goats and stuff were outside. That kind of stuff becomes emotional. And I do think my wife and kids had 2 of the goats out there, to be honest with you, that day. But I do think by having that scoring system and maybe coming up with a method to do that, Jeff, we move away from that subjectivity and start to become a little more objective with the concept, and knowing that it's the first time we've ever looked at it this way, and we may have to tweak it as we go through.
And maybe it's not a way for us like this year to have to do cuts, that would be great, but maybe reallocation or just getting information and finding out where people are, where groups are, so that we can make informed choices, I think is really
I
important.
agree.
And going back to some of our goals and that type of thing, I know we also have to work into our budget, capital improvements and that type of thing. So when you look at however you're going to fund the budget this next year with all the thoughts that we've had going from carryover, using reserves to a level to whatever, capital improvements come in there. And heaven knows we've been in regard to capital improvements, I think we've been really remiss in looking at our capital and bypassing it and not giving it its dues in order to give it its longevity it deserves. So I think capital becomes part of this when you talk about raises and salaries and staffing levels and all that. I just think that's one piece that, gentlemen, I'd like us to consider and realize that, yeah, it's just mortar and bricks, but where would we be without mortar and bricks and keep taking care of it? So I'd like to, part of that goal is, hey, how are we going to handle the capital with leftover, when we start looking at our revenue and determining our maintenance and operations and our salaries and that type of thing, whatever that leftover little pot is, including carryover, including that level of where we're going with our reserves. Capital's got to figure in there somewhere, and we do have some buildings that do need some address, but we also have some surplus stuff we need to peddle, gentlemen.
No, absolutely.
All right, so just capital in general, if you
Okay.
don't mind.
No, I think so.
Thank you. So we're creating a good list, and I think we're working in a direction of, in our regular meetings, and we just talk around the table and that towards how do we want to fund the outside agencies and other workshops. Working with Bonnie, I think there's been quite a acceptance to continue to work on how do we do this. I'll use these words, a mini grant process seems to be a direction we'd like to see us go. So I think we take a look at funding outside agencies and I would say beyond, that's one way to look at it. I still haven't figured out how we want to look at component units and that type of thing. But we'll get to those.
And maybe with the component units, it almost becomes some of our own little conversations and strategic planning about, as a commission, what are our long-term goals for our relationship with Southwest Counseling? What are the long-term goals and responsibilities for the hospital, for the events complex? And what do we see that we need to put in place, and how do we get them there? And maybe that might end up being a discussion, not just with their director, but maybe with their board. What directions are you going in? Which directions do we think we go in? How do we think we can fund you? And maybe those become cooperative conversations with those boards and entities.
Yeah, and I think you're right on. Those conversations got to carry on. But one of the things about it is there needs to be a determination that takes off from what statute responsibilities are based on statute. At this time, I'd like to take a moment and welcome Commissioner Tolman, arriving just a little late, but here. No, we scheduled to start at 4 o'clock. The invites went out at 4, but that's okay.
We're happy to have you.
You're just gonna have to live with what we done. We determined to go to a 3-person commission.
Mary's all, but hey, you just made her happy.
I'm just kidding. No, I know it. I'm sorry. No, you're fine. You're just fine.
We're glad to have you here, Mary, no matter what.
Anything that we've been talking about, just to share with you, just things we've talked about in general, we kind of, what are the areas we're looking at goals and that type of thing. And I think some of them fit into what you've talked about in the past. I do want to share with you, Commissioner Shanefeld's had an emergency in her family, but she may get on through Zoom when she gets that taken care of. So we'll watch for her to join us too. But just to quickly bring you up to speed, some of the goal areas we want to look at, what we want to do with raises, what we want to, and not in any rank order. So these are just areas, salaries and benefits and cost sharing with those benefits, staffing levels, redirecting of services and whether that's outside agencies or inside agencies, correct, Mr. Commissioner Smith?
Are we duplicating?
Yeah,
services?
and then duplication of services, and then funding of outside agencies / component units. And I think that big conversation revolves around what you and most of us have been talking about, is looking at an application, whether it's a mini grant application, something like that. Working with Bonnie to make that happen, and might have to have some input from Christina. And then, of course, a big component that has to be part of this discussion when we're moving forward with our capital goal or with our goals is capital, buildings, and that type of thing. So that's where we're at.
Hey, Mary, Gene
Oh,
said
you
you need
gotta
to
use
pull
the
up the
mic.
microphone. Gene already sent me a text.
Yeah. So yeah, we got to make sure we talk in the mics or can't be recorded. So take a deep breath and just kind of look at those and see if there's anything missing that you think we need to have conversations as a commission for as we proceed, and this will set the framework for future workshops. Anything else, Commissioner Lloyd? Do you want to add anything while Commissioner Tolman is looking at that?
Yeah, I guess maybe a timeline that we need to look at is and when we want to address these 3 or 4 areas. And, do we want to start talking about them one at a time tonight? Do we want to set other meetings? Do we want to set points of meetings? Because I think we have a good isolation of what we need to look at, but then we need to start having the specific conversations about those sub areas. So do we want to set timelines of when we want to do that? How do we want to accomplish it? Who needs to be part of those discussions? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I agree with you, but Commissioner Smith, do you agree? I mean,
Yes, I
if
agree.
You do. You agree? Okay.
I agree as well. I
Okay.
think we probably need to, probably kind of assign these things out, I guess, and whether it's like getting that modified grant process or a salaries overlook and getting information back to the commission as a whole, so that we can have a discussion and make decisions on things.
And how much of this will occur during our budgeting process, working with Bonnie, that, we'll just matriculate as all of us meet and do and have meetings, workshops to do this and work on it from the standpoint as we bring in those units and that type of thing. So,
Yeah.
Because we'll get some of that information after we review some of the questions that are asked that come in on the budget requests and that type of thing. But we've got to take time to review all those, is what you're
Are
saying.
we sending, we're not going to, but that's the thing, before we send that out, we want to send out a different one.
Yeah.
Modify
yeah.
it before we send it
Yeah.
out.
Very
I think
Well,
one of
that's
the,
part of our process is
Yeah.
who's going to modify that. And
I think one of the first things we have to do really, as we're talking about this is having 1 or 2 of us take the lead on modifying those questions and coming up with a modified scoring system. And that, to me, that would be one of the first things, kind of like Jeff said, break it up into committees. I think you could break it up into committees on the reduction of services and have a couple people and bring in some department heads or elected officials to have discussions over where do we identify departments or areas we're giving extra money to. The capital improvements, to me, kind of can just happen within its own group with the capital group, and we can bring them up to speed and have there. And I think raises and salaries, to me, is something that we can work with HR on and department heads and get what the financial implications of what those would look like. And I think staffing levels, as we talk about staffing levels, one of the things that stuck out to me in the last budget cycle was we made some decisions, and I was part of those at the end because of outside entities possibly having to reduce employees and things like that. But we've, through our early retirement program, we've had if you look at the sheets that have gone out from 2010 to now, we have some departments that have taken significant numbers of hits, and most of those say they can still run. And that, do we need to take a serious look and find a way to do an evaluation of what's really needed in each department? And honestly, and part of the problem with this is, we're all part-time commissioners, and it's a lot of work sometimes to figure this out. Who can help with this? But who would we, have do a review of departments to say, this is the recommended level? One of the nice things when we deal with the sheriff's requests is, because of the study that was done within the sheriff's department, we know how many patrolmen have to be on at the same time. We know how many people have to be in the pods. So it's kind of easy to determine, are we fully staffed or are we not fully staffed? Is there ways to create those mechanisms in the other departments and have that concept? So is that what you were kind of thinking about in staff levels, Jeff? And that's a big job. It really is, to really take a look, because especially, the little bit I know about assessing, I've learned in a short period of time from Dave Davis. But for me to be able to say, hey, I'm going to go in and evaluate if Dave Davis's crew is right. I ran nonprofits for years. My theory is going to be, you can do that on 3 people, Dave. And it's just because, and that's not true, but finding ways to, how do we come up with those numbers, and how do we evaluate that, and who are the right people to be on that team to figure that out?
Well, realistically, we already have a department hired to determine that.
Mm-hmm.
That's HR. And those are duties that can be assigned to that area. Now, granted, whatever, I'll guarantee you, whatever HR presents, there won't be agreement in certain areas.
That is correct.
Thank you.
That's correct.
I didn't even have to look at him.
Yeah.
And I did, and he didn't, and we didn't announce it, but we more or less have, this is kind of open. It's kind of between us, and Robert rules aren't real strict, but thank you, Mr. Davis.
Yeah.
But anyhow, yeah, no matter what is presented, there's going to be, disagreement. But we do have, when you take a look at raises, salaries, and staffing levels, we have a department that's responsible for that and can report on that for us. And, but again, too, I just want to caution us that not everybody's in agreement. We'll be in agreement with that. And so be it. But at least bring us the information and we'll make the decision.
Well, and I think that's part of the process. Is it's brought to us. There are naysayers or want to look at it differently, and department directors, I think, will have good insight too. And as I say, naysayers, it's just, I got to be honest. When I ran a company for a lot of years, whenever I was told I had to cut someone, I fought it every time. It's just a natural human instinct. And so, and there were times I was right, and we should not have cut that employee. And eventually that employee came back, and there were times I wasn't. And so, but I do think we can at least start having a look at that and an evaluation of what's needed. And I do, and as we talk about HR as the department to do it, do we need to have some counterbalances to that? Do we need to find processes? I don't know. So that's just there. And I think the other areas are there. And I can be honest, as far as reduction of services, it's something I've looked at for a while. And I know that actually Chairman Wendling actually gave Lauren and I a duty a while ago to work with Gary on reduction of possible services and those things too. So that's something we've already kind of started looking at also. So.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Okay, you're hearing a little bit, Commissioner Toman, anything to
Well,
add?
yeah, I'm very sorry for being late.
No,
And
that's-
it's nice to be in this format because I never realized Commissioner Smith had blue eyes, you know? I've never,
Here they are.
well, I'm,
never seen
I'm
his face
sit-
in a meeting.
yeah, I'm sitting here looking at this table and there's only one of us that has brown eyes and I'm wondering what that means.
Gonna make my brown eyes turn blue.
Please make my brown eyes turn blue. Yes, Mary. Thank you,
Well, I
Commissioner.
kind of, going back to what Commissioner Smith said at our regular meeting last week, you kind of outlined this kind of a format, but
she did.
looking at overall, that you feel this fits in with what you had outlined, because I kind of liked what you had proposed.
Yeah, I think so. This was just our priorities for the actual budget, and then the other things that I felt like were a priority were setting a schedule of our meetings, as well as a schedule for the groups to present to us as we wanted. Deadline for the applications to be back so that we can, how many do we want to look at each meeting or each workshop, those kind of things. So more than anything, scheduling kind of from here on out. What's our next date? What do we want to have accomplished by then? What's the next date? And so forth. So really these goals were the to-dos, and then the rest of my stuff was the whens, I think. When do we want to accomplish them?
And I know this is kind of a side tangent, but I like that, as we come up with a timeline of when this happens, I think one of the things I'd like to do differently this year too is as groups present, I'd like us to listen and not commit to any dollar amount and value till we're done with the budget. Because sometimes I feel like we'll listen to an organization and say, we can give you that. But down the road, at the end of it, we may not have been able to give them that. I would rather listen to people and then, and then have an honest conversation when we were done, because it's hard to make decisions on where we're going to allocate funds till you've heard from everyone.
And what's your thoughts about that, Mary?
Yeah, I agree with that. And especially with the outside agencies, we've got to find a way to be more objective. So it isn't one commissioner pitted against another one fighting for their pet project. I mean, it's okay to advocate for your projects, but also try to keep some objectivity in it.
So
That's why I think this
This
modified
grant-
grant process
Yeah.
perhaps helps us
Well,
out.
yeah, we were talking to Christina the other morning of maybe some kind of a matrix so you can see how many boxes do they have checked, kind of get a better
Yeah.
feel for, they get outside funding, they have community support, blah, blah, blah. And you have a more visual way instead of
Mhm.
the questions, but it might be a good,
And maybe that's not, the whole story, but that's
No,
part of the story.
right.
That gives us an idea of, okay, now now I can ask some questions. Now I have some ideas of where you're at, and we can go from
and
there.
it's more visual for us instead of
Yeah.
reading through 20 questions and how did they answer it? Now you check the box, you did this, you did this, you did that, or you didn't do it.
And I'm not sure you were here, but I said that earlier. Sometimes we have a director who's very eloquent and can present well, and we're like,
Right.
oh, yeah, I can see why you need that money. And
Right.
somebody else that's quiet or didn't do a nice presentation for us, and it's, all of a sudden they lose money. And so that's
Right.
not really fair when we're not gauging the needs based upon their presentation skills.
Well, and
So-
I think our goal always is to fund as well as we can with the tax money that we
Mhm.
have. I mean, so we're not out to just cut for the sake of cutting unless we feel that some department, Mr. Divis, is overfunded or something. I'm
Keep
just
picking on him,
joking. I'm
Linda.
just joking.
That's picking them all.
Did I sit in the wrong chair? I'm telling you.
But I do think that I like the idea of putting it together and not allocating, my idea about our meetings has always been, that's really decision time. It's not so much learning time. And the learning should generally happen before our meetings. Sometimes, we do have people present or things happen during the meetings, but I try to come with a decision in mind based upon what has, we get all these things in the packet, you can talk to people, whatever. And so I think that should be our goal as well with the budget, is to, talk and have decisions made so that we're not having, 6 and 8 hour marathon sessions of trying to listen to people and decide on allocating funds. Because that's just not really
especially after we've had an all-day meeting when we're brain dead. At that
Exactly.
point, it's
Yeah.
not fair. But I think it would be good to engage Bonnie, but I don't think we should put Bonnie on the spot, though. I don't really think it's fair to Bonnie to say, okay, you cut the budget, and she starts making line item cuts. I mean, if she sees we need to cut 10% and maybe it should come out of this department or that department, but I think we have to be really careful that we don't put you on the line for making decisions that should be on our back and not yours.
I am happy to do that if that's what you want me to do. I'm happy to help in
Well,
any way
and-
that I can. Sometimes I feel like I understand the financials really, really well, and I can see where we can cut some things. And sometimes I feel like the commissioners don't look at it in quite as much detail as I do. So I'm happy to
And
point things out and let you know where I see some things.
I think you need to be a resource to us.
Right.
Okay, first of all, and second of all, you have to be someone that we can look at and say, have we looked at this deep enough? And you should be able to tell us yes or no,
Right.
but it shouldn't be something that puts you on the spot.
No.
It should be something that we're going to look at, and ahead of time, did we look deep enough? Someone, could say, hey, where did we not look deep enough? And then that's not for you to shoulder when it comes to the surface. That's for us to shoulder.
Yeah. My understanding is that you are the decision makers, and I'm supposed to help provide the information that you need to make those decisions. And I can provide you anything that you want or ask for. I'm not really supposed to provide you with information that you're not asking for. But if you want me to provide information that you're not asking for, I'd be happy to do that.
I struggle with that a little bit personally.
I know, and previous commissioners have too, and that's why I
And
haven't done
I'm
that.
not, I'm not quite sure without your help and knowledge how it is we're supposed to take care of our taxpayers' money that they give to us if we're not open to having you be a full part of it and share with us what we're missing. I mean, how can we truly be accountable if
Well,
we?
then you just say, Bonnie, what have I missed? Then you're asking her
Yeah,
for the information.
Yeah, I agree with you. But with what Bonnie just said.
Well, that's what Jeff did last year.
I know it. Well,
And I'm like, I'd be happy to provide you with what I
Good.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the way it should be. And I'm not going to vote on it because we can't vote, but I think just in general, consensus wise, looking across this table and sensing it, I think everybody here would be very comfortable if they had the whole picture from you
Right.
rather than having to go, make a decision and then all of a sudden find out we didn't have the whole picture, one of us. Would anybody disagree with that?
Well, no, I agree with it, but I think you still have to be careful, Bonnie. It's just,
It's not Bonnie's decision.
no, I'm just saying, so she doesn't get herself out there saying, my personal opinion is that you should not.
Well, and I shouldn't say it's so much my personal opinion. It is my recommendation based on my analysis of the financial
There
information.
you go.
Yeah, there you go.
I think it's a better way of saying it because it's not subjective at all. It's completely based on the financial information. So it's not like, oh, I like these people, so
But
give them
as-
this, and no, I don't like these people, so don't give them anything. That it doesn't work like that. I mean,
No, but-
even last year when I was making recommendations, I mean, one of my friends is one of the directors, and I felt bad when I had to say, yeah, you shouldn't give them that much, but it was purely based on numbers.
I go back to what Commissioner Smith said is, there should be a time when we get all the information and learn about that individual budget or all of them. And then there's a time to make a decision. And I think this is where we gather all the information in a setting like this. And it's shared with us. And then we have a conversation that kind of where we're all at, but it isn't final. And then when we come to our commissioner meeting, we make a final decision for the budget based on those things.
Yeah.
I just, you're kind of squinting a little bit, Commissioner Lloyd, your thoughts?
Something in my eye. No, I think it's important that Bonnie gives recommendations, but based upon her knowledge, and it's our job to disseminate those recommendations and look at where we're at and where we go from there. I think it's no different than Gene coming in and saying, hey, we need to do this roof. That's Gene's area of expertise. We're going to listen to it. We're going to take a look at it. We're going to make a decision based upon recommendations. And as we do with all of our department heads or directors, we have the ability to listen to what they share, dig deeper, get more information, and go from there. So I do think it's important that she's sharing information, and that I think it's important that when we're getting information from everyone, that it is objective, and that we don't go into that subjectivity side or that emotional side, because that's when we tend to move off. But I think it's important that Bonnie oversees sees the budget, sees the tracking of the budget. She has the ability to see trends that we don't see. So not asking for that information and at least hearing it and considering it would be wrong.
And we wouldn't be serving our constituents very well if we did that, if we didn't do that. Go ahead, Mary.
And I'd like to see more engagement with the department heads in that capital committee. Maybe that capital committee could be one of our meetings. Maybe department heads could be another meeting. Maybe other electeds or part of the other electeds goes into what you're saying when we do the scheduling. So that we're actually sitting across the table and hearing what they have to tell us, not just one person trying to bring that message back to the whole commission. What do you think, Mr. Davis? I just think we need to be more engaged with the people who really have the knowledge.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I don't think any elected official has any problem coming down and answering any questions about their budget or anything else. Now, I can tell you back to our previous point where you were talking about HR and staffing levels, those kinds of things. I do caution you that the only person that knows how many people they need is the elected official.
Right.
No matter what the numbers are, we can justify our people, and most of us are doing more with less already. And when we're talking about staffing levels, as the valuation goes up and revenues come in, I think those numbers, we need to look at potentially increasing those to seeing where we need those, not necessarily cutting those.
So that maybe helps guide us as we're looking to Bonnie to help us develop a schedule. I mean, we should talk to the electeds and our department heads and the capital construction groups before we call in staffing, because then we would have the input from each of the departments or the heads as to what they can or can't do. Then staffing can put it all together. Like you come and say you need 5 or you can reduce 5, and that becomes part of that final analysis. So we don't go backwards on ourselves and have to
Sure.
do a lot of backtracking.
And you don't want to add people in a department and then a year later come back and tell them they have to remove the position that they just added. That elected official knows what they need to run their department to meet their statutory requirements. And I think that's a big voice, and that's something that needs to be heard.
And I think going back to my original statement, when we have an HR department do and present that, when that's presented, we need to listen to both sides.
And
I think that's what I hear, Commissioner.
And it should be the same side. I mean, it should be something.
I would hope that the HR and that would be pretty well on the same page in that type of thing, but
I would hope so.
I would hope so. And who knows, maybe we'll be surprised.
Yeah.
But but the point is, everything that's being said here is, what's worked in the past hasn't really worked. Hasn't worked, but not worked well or been right. I think we'd all agree on that. And I think we're moving in a direction to have conversations to move forward, make it differently. But it's a commitment on our part. It's a commitment to these types of meetings to do it all based on a schedule that we would put together. So
The
very
main
well.
point is that we leave each of these meetings that we checked off, we actually did something instead of kicking it down the road. Well, we'll do it next time. That gets frustrating. I know there's so much to do, we can't, but if we could just only pick one thing and say, we're going to have this done and we're going to have Bonnie do us a schedule. I don't care what it is, that we can say we accomplished something.
I will say one thing, we have accomplished more in this meeting right now than we have any other time. We have a list, and we've had a conversation of what we can do with those lists. And we've done more in the last 50 minutes, I feel, than we have in the combination of some of our meetings. Now, that's just my feeling. I don't know.
Well, then let's finish strong. Let's finish strong then.
We need to. We're 45, 50 minutes
Sure.
in. My question to you is, commissioners,
Mhm.
do you need a break, or do you want to party on.
I want to forge forward.
Okay, Mr. Smith?
Oh, yeah, let's finish.
I would
Yes,
just
ma'am.
like to add one thing. I think we need to invite Treasurer Barbudo and his lead staff person, because we can't expect him to be up to speed on all these things, but I think it is important that his head staff person is sitting here at the table with us or in the room so that he's learning while they're helping make sure the treasurer's role is covered.
Sure.
You know, yeah, and I agree that what we're doing and forging forward is in all new things, and we're an open meeting. We don't have to tell anybody they have to be here. If they wish to kind of see where we're going, they may not be here, but they may be on YouTube watching. They might, if they were in Zoom, had gotten an invite, I'd see them on the thing, but I'll guarantee you, they're with technology, they probably may be watching on YouTube, or they have the opportunity to come in here. But I agree with you that as we move forward, we hope that anybody's involved, Commissioner Tolman, I agree with you, is somewhat engaged in whether it's through technology or the opportunity to review the recorded stuff or being in present. And I tell you what, I appreciate seeing Bonnie here, and I appreciate seeing Dave here. They've helped us out a bunch, and this isn't a closed conversation.
Got Cindy here too.
Cindy, yes, there she is. We
Don't forget Cindy.
couldn't move forward.
And this is the quietest we've ever had John De Leon. So this is and he's usually typically pretty
All
helpful.
right,
So
so let's
I
forge
guess-
forward.
So forging forward, I think the number one thing we need to really move forward for, the first thing would be really moving forward in that ranking system and creating that, because I think that sets off a lot. So I would be honest, since I've been working with Christina a little bit on it and talking to her about it, have some history and grant writing to take that project as a lead on that. If anyone would like to help me, I would be more than willing to take assistance.
I will be interested.
All right.
So Mary and I will take that.
So
A
we'll put,
modified grant process.
we'll put ranking financials or modified. I like modified
Yeah.
grant process.
And as Mary and I go through this, we'll send you guys emails of questions like, here's some of the questions we're gathering that we think we need to know to answer these things. What are we missing? What are we missing from your perspective? Because I think one of the nice thing about sitting here today is we're actually hearing each other out a little bit better, because a lot of times it's just business. Hey, got to make a motion. We got to move forward. We got to go. We have a little discussion. And I think the great thing about this commission is we got 5 pretty smart people that have different backgrounds and knowledge. And when we put it together, we can do great things. So I guess the second thing we probably need to look at
Oh,
then.
I felt your warm and fuzzy all the way over here. Thanks.
Yeah.
man.
Hey, no problem. You guys make me look good sometimes. So I appreciate that. But I guess, I think the second thing we need to come up with is our schedule, I think. And from what, listening to what everyone said is, I know we've talked about meeting with people beforehand and getting this out. I guess, when do we want to have Mary and I to have this ready to present for you guys? So because I think that will help us out in getting our timeline done. But when do we want to start working with, talking with the outside folks? So do we start with components then outside, or how do we do that?
How long do you guys think it'll take you to put something together?
I think we can. Yes. That is not going to be an option. Medicaid has to be figured out tonight, Mary. So I would say I would be comfortable to say, what do you think, mid-November?
Yeah, that's coming up fast, and I would have time to work with you next week and
I
with
mean,
Christina.
what if we said,
weeks?
what if we made to have a rough draft preliminary for the second meeting in November?
Well, when you say second meeting,
No.
let's talk about second workshop.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's do it here.
Let's talk about for this as we move forward as workshops. Let's until we feel we have documents that are
Mhm.
well enough to move forward and approve and bring to a meeting. I would prefer workshops.
I'm okay with that, Doc.
November 15th, 3 weeks from today.
So
That the
let's make
second
it November
Tuesday in-
22nd and give us 4 weeks.
That's the week of Thanksgiving. I
Ugh.
don't want to, get into
Yeah.
that or not.
That'd be a tough week.
Because that would be an off week for.
Doesn't have to
commission.
be on a Tuesday. Could go to, let's go,
Yeah.
could be that Thursday after the 15th.
Man, I like Mondays.
You like Mondays,
Yeah.
which would be the,
I have little dots next to my dates where I have stuff,
I kind of like Mondays too.
and I have tons of dots everywhere but Mondays. have a few dots on Mondays, but not very many. And Monday, the 15th, I actually have no dots at all.
Is that a meeting week?
I got a haircut.
Mm. Yes, it would be.
Haircut scheduled on Monday night.
What hair you
I got a
cutting?
haircut.
It would be a meeting. It would be a meeting. on
You
the
might want to ask for your money back.
I don't care if it is on a meeting Monday because I usually am in here that Monday too.
Okay,
it
so do you
doesn't
want to do
matter.
the 15th or the 22nd?
For our next workshop?
Is that a Monday, Jeff? I don't have my
That's
calendar.
15th and 22nd are both Mondays.
I can go either. I think Mary and I can at least have a preliminary draft done by that day.
All
You
right,
feel comfortable with that, Mary?
Yeah, but I think maybe we need to sit down with Bonnie and Christina
and Christina.
at some point.
No, Christina is important in that process.
Yeah.
And I think what we need to do, Mary, is have the first meeting initially with just us two to kind of flesh it out, then bring them in with our ideas and go from there.
Well,
But I'm not sure that has to be at the next work session. I mean, we can get you a draft, but I think we need to start with our core government and work up to our department heads and our elected
Well,
and work
And
through
that's the
them.
next thing we can talk about. So the order we need to see people.
do the
Yeah.
order and when we're going to start that.
So
Right.
Mary and I we'll do another workshop on the 15th and Mary and I will have some kind of rough draft
Okay.
to present.
Okay, so just so we know.
Maybe a dollar recommendation too. I mean, we've been doing about 5 million, haven't we, Bonnie, with those outside groups?
Yeah, it's been roughly that. Around
But do
5
we
million.
want to, look at a one,
I think,
or wait till
Let's-
later to
let's-
get the dollars going?
well, let's, there's a couple things that concerns me when we put a dollar on it. Is we're saying, hey, we're allocating this amount of money. And we have not yet decided how it is we're going to handle the increases in health insurance. We have not yet
Well,
decided
that's why I'm
if
saying
we want to
start
do
with those
raises.
Other people first, the
And-
department heads and on.
Well, but department heads won't have anything to do with raises or how we're going to handle health insurance costs. We're going to get some presentation from Gary in a regular meeting on the health insurance costs and that type of thing. So I truly am okay.
No, I agree with you.
I'm
not
okay,
opposing.
but keep in mind, what are we working with? Working with revenue minus costs and personnel, which is health insurance, salaries and everything. Operation and maintenance. And then what's left for capital, component units, and outside agencies. Along with the idea that we're going to have to decide if we want to use carryover to supplement those, as well as we decided we would go down to our level of our reserves at 25. What are those? How much, we have. So I'm a little reluctant.
No, I think you're right. I'm not
I
opposing that at all. I'm
I
just saying
think
at some
that's-
point, we have to set a
Sure.
lid on it. I'm not
Yes.
saying up front.
yeah, okay, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think
I
the
think it's-
15th, present your,
Yeah.
The 15 will
Make sure,
framework
Yeah.
and we can have that discussion. Maybe that'd be the majority of the meeting.
That would be a majority of the meeting. That'd be a good
Yeah.
meeting just to look at that so we can get it rocking and rolling. and get it.
Well, and I think
What
one of the
time?
things too, is we talk about seeing the agencies ahead of time is,
What time? 4 o'clock? Is that what we all agree
We're
to?
not there yet.
Oh,
one of the, I
Set the
think,
date. You just
Yeah.
didn't set the time. I was just trying
Exactly.
to clarify.
I know it. We'll get there.
but I think one of the nice things too, is if we're able to be with agencies ahead of time, I think it serves something that Jeff had brought up. And allows us to have that information beforehand. So when we're discussing it in that budget, we've already kind of formulated where we're at and we kind of have our own thoughts and processes. And we're not adding that to, oh my gosh, we have to figure out where this piece plays in the puzzle. We've already started putting those pieces into the puzzle.
Okay, going back to that would be that will be a topic for the next workshop. And we decided it's going to be on what date, Mr. Commissioner?
Monday, November 14th, 15th.
15th,
At
Monday,
4
November 15th at 4
p.m.
o'clock.
4:00 PM.
And the workshop will last no longer than an hour and a half. We're going to stay with those guidelines unless we,
Not unless.
huh?
There's no unless. There's no unless.
I have an airport Zoom at 5:30, so.
Okay, good. But anyhow, we'll do that. Did you get that?
Yes.
And let me ask though, does that work for you, the clerk? Because we have to remember that when we do these meetings, the clerk has to have a representative present to make sure that that you have availability. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. De Leon, he just can roll with us.
Yeah, he just rolls. That's how we roll. Okay. Okay, so that'll work good. So the next thing, you said the next thing then we should look at a schedule?
Yeah, and I think we can start having that discussion the next meeting, because I think what will allow us is we'll be able to see how far the product that Mary and I have created is. And that will help us create a schedule by knowing how close it is to roll out. Does that make sense?
We need to look at it.
So, yeah.
I think after that, then I like the idea of visiting with our elected officials, perhaps at a December meeting.
Yeah. I think it's good
Do
to
elect,
get the important things up front, like the elected, the department heads, because
Mhm.
really this grid that we're making is kind of the last. These are, these aren't our core government
And it's it's
entities.
the least amount of money too, honestly,
It
out of all of
is.
our allocations,
It
but
is.
it's what we seem to struggle
really
with the
is.
most, But yeah, I think if we can
So if you
also,
do elected officials, then you do the department heads, then you're pretty well getting the core covered.
Yeah.
And then maybe HR or
Well, we
components
could
or
bring in-
whatever.
bring in the meeting after that, a meeting of electeds, then a meeting of department heads.
Yeah. And then that capital group. construction.
Definitely need to bring capital groups in and see where they're at and what their requests are gonna be.
Is that enough? Bonnie could make a tentative schedule. Are we doing this twice a month or once a month?
I think, you know what, I think we're gonna do it as often as it's needed, Commissioner, because
I think so.
I'm sorry to say, but time's running out and we're trying to do a new process and as we work towards June, I'm confident we can get there with all the right help and everything, but it's again too, I would like to have more time on the back end to pull pieces together that we may have to look at differently, so I'd rather,
I'm
you know,
totally,
let's just
whatever
get
our
in.
schedules can handle. I mean, we have
Yeah.
to make sure we're all here.
There you go.
Mhm.
Whatever our schedules can have, that's a good way to put it, but
And I don't think we'll need to meet within this setting until Mary and I are ready on the 15th. Because that will really be the next piece of
But maybe
business.
Bonnie could whip us out a tentative schedule that would show 2 times a month. Electeds, next meeting, department heads, next meeting, capital.
we'll have Sally do that. That's Sally's
Okay,
job.
well, I don't know whose job it
I'll
is.
talk to Sally based on this
But it can
conversation.
just be a tentative thing that we.
We tentatively,
towards.
by the next meeting, I'll talk with Sally if it's all right with you, and we'll look at basically a tentative schedule on off Tuesdays, which would be
Off Mondays.
would tell me which one you'd like, off Mondays or off Tuesdays, commissioners?
I'm a Monday guy.
I'm Monday guy.
Monday,
I'm a Monday
especially
guy,
Monday
too.
afternoons. Monday mornings are
Okay, so
rough.
we'll
Monday
go
afternoons
off,
are great.
we'll go second and fourth Mondays, 4 o'clock. We'll work it right through with the idea that we all understand that we may have to call another meeting in between and that type of thing. And I will work with her. And after the next meeting, for the future meetings, elected, department chairs, capital, and then I think we'll have a conversation amongst ourselves as to who we'd like to see come in first, as far as component and outside. We have a couple, and we got to have the conversations whether we want any of the joint powers boards in, because one joint power board is completely self-funded. We never hear a word from, and that's water, the water plant. The other joint powers board is a board that is joint communications, which is a huge part of our general fund. And the third joint powers board is the airport. And then, of course, we have the fourth joint powers board that's new, which is telecommunications, which Commissioner Shankville sits on, which is basically internet, help me out a little bit. Broadband, thank you. Does that make sense?
That way, if we have a tentative schedule, if we can't do an off Monday, we could do a same Monday or something.
We can talk, we can talk
We
and
can get it on our calendars anyway.
get it all squared away. I agree, but let's, more's been done tonight and in my opinion. And I want to especially thank everybody that's gone forward. So as we move forward, we have, what else? That when you take a look at our sets.
I think we can start scheduling in what's next after we get through that process. I think the big discussions next time is deciding what do we see as the bigger priority to have HR look at, and raises in salaries or staffing levels, and start setting and then giving Gary a date on which one of those that we think are the most important that project will be completed.
I'm going to muddy the waters up a little bit.
Okay.
And it's basically on two topics we have for our goals. And whether you look at it as redirecting services or duplication of services, those two, we've got to decide, how are we going to do that? I mean, how are we going to look at our agencies, component units? It's primarily probably, well, I'm not going to say it's going to be primarily outside agencies in duplication of services, whatever it is. But there's a lot of them out there. How do you want to go about looking through?
I don't know.
What do you think?
So maybe duplication of services wasn't the right wording, although that is something we need to look at. My thought is more scope, I guess. Are we funding things or areas that are expanding and doing more than they need to do, that we can contract and bring back in to be under what our obligation is? That's more of what I'm.
Okay.
And that's a good conversation. I think we need to have it, because when you talk about scoping and you're talking about the services we're paying for basically in all the outside agencies, how do we know that we're getting the service for the funding?
Well, I think there's two pieces of that. I think that's on the upfront part of it, that's going to be Mary and I's job, and using Christina and Bonnie and whoever else we have help us figure it out, be able to answer those right questions, to know that information up front. And number two, I think maybe the second part of the process we need to create is some kind of accountability that any agency we're giving funding for, that they file quarterly reports that are reviewed,
Well,
that we kind of know. So there's the piece there on the outside agencies. And I think kind of carving it back to where Jeff was also out on that internal stuff, having discussions regarding, and I don't want to call anyone out in this meeting specifically, so we'll just stay away from that. But I guess we all know I like libraries, so this is pretty safe to say I'm not after the library. But an example of that could be, statutorily, it does say you have to have one library at the county seat. We have two libraries in Rock Springs, one library in Green River, and libraries in all the small communities. Want to make sure, Dave Martin, I don't get quoted back there, but I'm saying let's cut a bunch of libraries. I'm just giving this as an example. But having that as a discussion, do we need all
Exactly
five
what I'm-
libraries?
Exactly what I'm saying.
Is there specific departments? I know when I first came in as a commission, there was a department that I was actually asked, do we even think we need? And that was, because we were one of only 2 counties that had that department in the entire state. Is that a needed department? And it's worked here in Sweetwater County. Maybe we need to have those discussions, and that's kind of where we're at. And so I think it's a two-headed problem. And when you start to look at it from the outside component agency, the outside agencies, Boys and Girls Club, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, somewhat to a smaller point, YWCA not as big. They all kind of hit some of the same population. So that's where you're kind of at, Doc. And I think Mary and I have got to kind of come up with a way in our questions. How do we get that information extracted?
I'm gonna take it a little deeper, but I
Okay.
want to go back to your library a little
Okay.
bit. Caution. Many years ago, a certain commissioner brought up closing library buildings.
Oh, I'm not going
Oh,
to.
no, don't go there. The other thing I would share with you is our job is to provide funding to the library board. It's their job to determine how it's spent. And if they choose to figure out a way to provide services to 6 buildings, 7 buildings, which they do in their small towns, that's their call.
Yeah.
We'll
Well-
only provide the funding.
Well, that gets to the question.
So I'm
Have your
I'm
own
gonna-
board.
I'm going to go back, huh?
that gets to the question of, do they have their own board?
And they do.
But I mean, any of these events complex, library, any of them, do they have their own board, or elected board, or appointed
Appointed board.
board?
Yeah,
That
they-
also would have some bearing on, we have been funding them. They do have their own board, and they're part of a governmental entity, whereas some of them, like some of the, like Climb Wyoming, they do a really, really good job, but we have been voluntarily giving them extra money, or the Boys and Girls Club, or any of those.
Yeah. So
They might not have as much of a priority simply because they don't have their own elected board, or they don't
Oh.
tie into county
And that,
government.
that goes into the aspect of the philosophy and the conversation of through the grant processes, do some of the agencies continue to be funded? Not only at the level they are, but continue to be funded at all. But I'm going to take my conversation. I'm going to use a better example. I'm going to use a hospital as an example. We do not give through their request, and by statute, we provide maintenance money to them. And in return of that money, what do we get from them?
Title 25.
No, what do we get from them realistically? We get a list of where that money's spent, the accountability, and that type of thing. My thinking is, at what point in time, now this is out there a way, this is a stretch, but think about it. If we put money out for Title 25, for example, we should be able to say, show us how that money was spent. If you take a look at our contracts that the county attorney's office has written, they're leaning more and more to the direction that these entities that we give them money, they have to provide better accountability of how that money spent that they receive from us. I often wondered why and it's a job and a half. It's all more so than that, but they should invoice. We should invoice. Do an invoicing process similar to what the hospital provides us as to what that money's spent on, and then release the dollars.
Well,
rather
that's
than
kind of
give-
mixed up too. I noticed on some entities, we just give them a chunk of money. On others, we get the itemized list.
Well, and that's where I'm going is, you know what,
I don't think that's,
we're, if you take a look at the Southwest Counseling funding,
The senior center.
That's
no,
complex.
just a minute, let me, no, don't, this, we're talking component
Let-
units,
let the,
Southwest
Let the
Counseling.
cogs turn, they turn slowly. Let 'em-
Yeah,
let 'em
the
go.
Southwest Counseling,
Southwest Counseling.
Southwest Counseling, Youth Center, and the hospital, there's some statutorily requirements for them. And if you take a look primarily at the youth home, the contract for the youth home and the contract for Southwest Counseling, it's written that this money is for specific services. We give them the money before we get the services. We should be able to, whether it's an outside agency or a component unit, we should be able to get the same thing from them that we get from the hospital before we pay them. I'd say basically, show us the services you provide. And I tell you what, that'll get away from is one, it'll get away from outside agencies building cash reserves. That'll get away from outside agencies looking at the county to continuously fund raises and benefits and that type of thing, where they don't to go out and look for other ways to do that. Just food for thought. I don't know if we're ready to go in that direction. I don't know if where the suicide comes from and going in that direction. But this, if you want to really, really crank it down because revenues are getting tight and going to directly what Commissioner Toman says, we should have to be invoiced. There are outside agencies out there that get a chunk of money, but realistically, when you look at what their needs are purely to keep the doors open of keeping somebody there working, but there's a chunk of money to do a whole lot of other stuff that we don't know about. And we should know. And a quarterly report is great, but I don't think that answers the question. I think invoicing for services rendered, and Mary, you brought that up when you were first, either it was campaigning or the first meeting you were in, you brought up invoicing. You know, people, we need to invoice. In fact, came up with one of our meetings we're talking about, and you said they need to invoice. So it'll come to me sometime, and that stuck with me.
No.
And I don't know. What do you think? I mean, it's just out there for thought.
I think with Title 25, that's a great example.
Yeah.
Of someplace where we've really struggled to see how our dollars are being spent and where they're going and how it's being used. So I think that's a great example of something. It's worked really well with the hospital, and I think that it
Yeah, and it
could
was,
be good.
and you know what's funny about it?
Title 25, would you get an invoice and I get a stack of papers that are confidential that have all the services that each person gets from the hospital? That comes to me and I check to make sure there are residents.
Well,
Just so you can, I'm just letting you know that
Yeah.
they do.
So
invoice.
we don't get that and then send them the money.
Yeah.
that-
I only pay when they invoice.
Oh, okay.
invoice your services.
So why can't we go to that system to all the agencies
All the
or those kinds?
agencies and yeah,
Can I-
don't get me wrong, invoicing is maybe going on with Title 25, but I think there's some other things too that generate in the contract that cause for even more conversation, but that's not for here and right now. I mean, we're just talking, we see some examples out there that are being used. Why can't we use them for everything
maybe-
we do?
And maybe that's the extension after Mary and I create this new kind of point system. Maybe our job is to create a follow-up of what they do to Bill and, you know, to create, and maybe that's a different committee, but maybe that's something we look at too. So.
Excuse me, commissioners, but I believe Bonnie, you were,
I
wanted
did
to
want to say
comment.
something.
Sure.
So the money that is approved through the budget, it does not just get distributed. Everyone does invoice the county for
They
those.
invoice quarterly, but do they invoice the services that money was used for specifically?
Some of them do and some of them don't.
Okay.
Some of them just send an invoice saying budget allocation. And then others invoice and they include all of their expenses that add up to that dollar amount. So,
And-
but all of them do send a voucher and supporting documentation. So an
And-
invoice
And we,
before they are paid
and
that
we,
amount.
and we approve them through the general
Yes,
approvals that we do
yes.
with Carrie and those when they send those out weekly.
Mhm.
But we never really get into the meat of it. Is that correct?
You can.
Oh, yeah, I know we can. And I'm glad to hear that because we can. I always figured that it was money that was allocated, so let it ride. But at the same token, we
Yeah.
can change how things are going.
You can if you want everyone to show all the expenses. I think the hard thing about that is then you're just gonna get people's payroll. I mean, you'll just get some random expenditures that are for those services. It's not like Title 25 where it's specific, where this is Title 25 patients and this is what we're billing for. Those contracts, in the contracts, it just says, you know, you'll provide this service and it's very broad. So they're just gonna pick payroll expenditures for their employees that are providing that service, direct expenditures, and they're just gonna provide receipts and documentation. So it's different than the hospital maintenance where it's just paying for their
Thank you.
maintenance. It's different than Title 25 where the county's just paying for their Title 25. It's
But it's-
more broad for
It's just not consistent across the board. Some of them are getting a free block grant and other ones are having to be accountable for every dollar. So I agree with Commissioner Winley.
Well,
If
that's
they
just-
have a contract, I still
And
think
that's
they should
number
be
5.
accountable
I
and
think
we
it's-
should treat them all the same,
And I-
not some of them get a free ride and some of them have to account for every penny.
And I only add that that's good for conversation, Commissioner Lloyd, as a number 5 moving forward and that type of thing. What do you think, Commissioner Smith?
can I add one more thing?
Yeah, and
Sorry.
then we'll go to Mr. Davis.
So the reason that the hospital maintenance is different is because by state statute, the commission is supposed to approve those before they're dispersed.
Thank you
So
very
there's a
much.
state statute that addresses that. So
You're-
that is why the hospital maintenance.
Well,
one is
that's
treated
another
differently.
checklist on our little thing. Then we could say, is it by statute or not?
Very good. Thank you. Remind me. Mr. Davis?
Yeah, and just to clarify too, anything that's listed on the tax bill that is associated with a mill levy, that is exactly what you're talking about. That money is receipted in by the treasurer's office and paid out to the treasurer of that board.
And-
So that is not something where vouchers are submitted,
No.
nor will it be if it's allowed to be the revenue is generated from a mill levy. That is just a tax collection and a tax distribution, just to clarify.
So that's
you-
on a different sheet altogether. We need to keep
Yes.
that separate so we understand that.
Right, because those
Okay.
ones, that's how that's worked. It's just receipt, it's a tax receipt and then a tax disbursement.
Yeah.
So Dave's referring to the hospital. Well, the hospital maintenance by statute has to be for that. It has to be approved.
Comes out
but
of
it
the
is
12
set through
mil.
The mill levy. So Dave's exactly right.
Hospital.
Same with events complex, the library, the museum,
All special
and the
districts,
Southwest Counseling.
all special districts on
Um,
the tax.
All
Not all-
component
not all
units
special.
except Board of Health.
Okay.
All special districts.
All
Not
component
come out of the
units.
mill levy.
All component units except Title 25 is separate. So Title 25 is not part of the 12 mills. Hospital maintenance is. And then Board of Health.
They have, but they still come off of the tax roll.
Right. They're not a special
Yes.
district. I heard that term thrown around. Special districts are different. This is what's allocated under the 12 mil due to a levy. And like Bonnie said,
Right. So
library,
they don't
Southwest
invoice for
Counseling.
those. It
Yeah.
just goes straight out.
Okay,
Just to clarify.
All
Yeah.
right.
that's good.
What
Thank
do you
you.
think?
We have very little say after all.
Yeah, really, we do, but I think,
Mr.
there are
Davy,
some
on-
things we can do better,
He might have something.
better
to
with.
say,
So,
or-
well, just a minute.
Okay.
All right, we'll go round table for the good of the order and we'll include Mr. De Leon if we.
I just
need
don't want to leave
but-
anyone out.
So with that, as I look at our time and everything, and to be respectful for the 5:30 quitting time, I'll just quickly add, anything else for the list, commissioners? Mr. Toman?
I think we've come up with a pretty good
Sounds
list.
good with it?
Yeah.
Mr. Lloyd?
I feel good about the direction we walked out of this meeting in tonight.
Mr. Smith? You okay?
I'm doing great. Thanks.
Good, thank you. All right, with that, for the good of the order, commissioners, anything to add moving forward?
No.
All right, and then, of course, Mr. De Leon, anything to add?
Agree with some of Bonnie's concerns about what fits in well into getting more specific and less. And that's something that can be discussed, I think, as they're developing the grant process.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Davis?
Yeah, just when we get to the point where the elected officials are going to be invited in to speak, if we could get, what you're after, specifically, what do you want from the elected officials? That would help us tremendously.
Okay, so that's a to-do for the next meeting.
Okay.
To-do for the next meeting is,
Be at the next meeting then?
huh?
The 15th, we're doing the
Yeah, the 15, yeah.
modified.
Yeah, and if we can get the modified, but we also need to have, because after that will be the electeds for the meeting after that. So we need to decide at that 15th meeting.
I think
Yeah.
staffing levels are
Yeah,
main.
current budget, staffing levels, needs.
You can,
Because I-
you can help us though too by suggesting what you think is
So-
important.
And I think really, some of that conversation about capital, because I think one of the dangers that happens with capital is when people have to they cut capital. And then what happens is 3 years from now, no one's bought a computer. So instead of buying 3 computers for your department this year, you're now buying 12. And so I think those are, I think we can come up with a fairly good list for that.
And that group's done a good job. So
Hmm.
we'll count on them to work. So,
So-
Bonnie, anything?
Yeah, I was actually just gonna say what Dave said, just a little more specifically. I do think that the elected officials and department heads, everyone that comes in should be told what you want to discuss with them prior, so they do have time to prepare. I've always struggled a little bit with when you do meet with everyone and give them those timeframes, is a lot of them don't know what to say, and they end up just talking about what they do, the outside agencies. And I've always felt we're there to talk about their budget. And that usually wasn't discussed. It was usually discussed of what they do, and which in my mind, I'm like, well, I know this. I hear this every year. I read their budget information they submit. It's all in there. We're here to talk about the budget. But yeah, if you can tell them what you want to discuss, and if that's your goal to do raises, salaries, benefits, and cost sharing, staffing levels, possible reduction of services and the scope of what they do. I think it's important to let them know that that's what you're there to discuss, or even capital, if that's what you want to discuss with them, just give them a heads up so they can be prepared. To go
Yeah.
that way. That way it's more consistent. It's a more consistent meeting when you're meeting with each of them individually than opposed to just this one talking about this and this one talking about this. There's just nothing to base anything on if they're all talking about different things. So I think it's important. I think these are good goals that you've established and a good starting point. And I just think that's important to communicate to them before you meet with them so they're prepared for that.
I'll have a comment about that after.
Okay.
Eric, you came in late. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just heard that we're not cutting the land use department budget, so I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just its head.
I'm
Just the
okay.
department head.
If you believe you heard that, I'm gonna believe. I have some land in Alaska for sale, you know.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have
We-
anything.
I know.
Thank you,
You'll,
though.
you'll get your day at the table.
All right, so
Eric.
here's kind of what I'm hearing. So if we don't mind, and is let's for the next meeting, Commissioner Lloyd and Commissioner Tolman working with Bonnie and Mary, or Bonnie and
Christina.
Christina, thank you very much. If you can have this prepared so we can have it talked about the grant. And then let's leave the last, is 15 minutes enough for us to come back, last 15 minutes to establish what it is we want to request? A definite list from
Perfect.
department, starting off with elected officials, departments. The one thing about it is there's some things that I look on the list, and I hope you would agree with me, that's not a discussion for department chairs and elected officials, and that's raises. I think that's our job, but we need to have it on the list and include it. I think we need to get some data. I share this much. I talked with HR that every 1% of a cost of living raise is about $220,000. Is that what I understand, or
Makes sense.
would you?
Seems higher than it's been in the past.
It might be a little high, but I'm gonna say right around 200,000, give or take a little more. Okay, so keep that in mind, commissioners. All right. Okay, with that way, we know what we're gonna do for our next meeting on the 15th at 4 o'clock, right? Commissioners, do you like this setup, or do you wish to change it
I
for the
think
workshop?
I think it's a great setup. My question is though, could we save our cruise time by just using Castle Rock? Because I think we could put about 10 chairs around the room and still have plenty of space.
Why don't we like this? The technology in here is a lot better.
Oh, I agree. It just makes it easier on some of our folks, was the only thing.
When you say easier, meaning what?
Means, yeah, I mean, really, we could have put this crowd around the Castle Rock room
Oh.
and we could have saved the man hours to do the work. So
Well, that's a possibility, but when I looked into, I don't care, but the technology in this room is a lot better. It's a lot set up so we can do this type of thing is what I was shared than what's in that room. I agree, there's some of the things, but you know what? There's a lot of money stuck in this room, and it was designed for this, and that's what it's for, and easy to find, and it's assigned as the board chambers. I don't know. If I'm outvoted, you can't vote, but you can say agree or disagree. That's fine with me.
I just think I like this setup for this type of meeting, wherever it's at, just so we can actually have conversation and look at each other and not have to rely on looking on a video screen and as Jeff Smith has a conversation with him through the video screen. So this format, that's my only thing. I think this room works. I think the technology is here, but I do think the option is still there at Castle Rock for those various reasons. But that's just my opinion. So
What about you, Commissioner Smith?
I love it in here.
Commissioner Tolman?
Either way is fine.
So, well, I think if there's something comes up and we want to try the Castle Rock, it's a smaller group. Let's leave the room, let's leave that open, but how much of a problem is it to set this up, Mr. Legursky? Okay. Well, if it becomes difficult, then let's look at something different. The one thing nice about this is we got a place for Cindy, we got a place for our attorney. They have their computers, they have their technology. If Sally wants to show up and use her station. There's everything there. There's our stuff up there if people want technology, that type of thing. So I think for now, we'll meet in here, Commissioner Lloyd. How's that sound?
Bear with me.
Are you sure? I don't want you to
Hey,
feel, I don't
this
want
is
you
the
to go
one
away.
vote I'm going to give up for the rest of
There's
the
no
year. I'm
voting
winning
here.
every
No,
vote.
there's no voting here.
This is the one discussion I'll give up. So yeah, we're good.
The one you'll give up. I like that.
I'll make the sacrifice for the group on this one.
All right, you're a good man. Okay.
Especially if my concern is hearing Gene felt good that they can make this happen easier next time. I'm comfortable with it.
Good. And I do like the technology in here a lot better. So with that, if there's no more work to come before this commission this